Near the end of 2023, Joe Biden's disapproval rating is at a record high, with 55.5% of Americans disapproving Joe Biden. As a result of that, Donald Trump's polling numbers have looked more favorable than ever, as he is currently leading in many national polling. But will that be enough for Trump to win the presidency? In today's video, we'll find out. Now we're going to be filling in this map here, which you can see the safe states have already been filled in for both sides. The toss-up states are what we're going to be taking a look at. The competitive states, the two districts have been filled in because they don't have any district-wide polling. We're going to be going in alphabetical order. The first state on this map here will be the state of Arizona. As you can see in all these polls, Joe Biden is only leading in two of them. Now there are some other candidates that are included, but you can see the two polls that suggest Joe Biden is ahead. Both of them have other candidates involved. That is not Donald Trump. And we see that Trump is consistently leading in many of the polls. Now, we don't have a lot of polls right now, but still it is somewhat significant in that the state of Arizona would be a likely Republican on this map. Now, going to the next state on the alphabetical order, which would be the state of Florida. The state of Florida here, we would say that Joe Biden is leading in one of the recent polls, but generally speaking, we see that Trump or DeSantis would perform pretty well. Now, we see that DeSantis sometimes have a larger lead, but nonetheless, Trump is definitely favored in the Sunshine State of Florida. Now, going to the next state here, which would be the state of Georgia. The state of Georgia here, you would see that, again, that Trump is actually performing really, really well. Trump is leading in the vast majority of current polls, and actually none of the polls featuring Donald Trump or any of the recent polls suggest that Trump would be behind Biden in the hypothetical matchup in the state of Georgia, though it's important to notice here that Trump is actually not at 50% in any of these polls. Nonetheless, this is so far looking pretty good, damn good for Donald Trump. The next state we're going to take a look at is the state of Iowa. Now, the state of Iowa here, you see, Trump did win the state by 8 in 2020, but nonetheless, Trump is still leading by pretty substantial margins, around 10% across the board in most of the polls, and therefore the state of Iowa is also a likely Republican state on this map here. Now, going to the next state here, which would be the state of Michigan. Now, the state of Michigan here was a state that Joe Biden was able to win by around 3 percentage points. Nevertheless, if we look at the polling, it's still nonetheless not very good for the Republicans. Not very good for the Democrats. You see that Democrats are not doing so well in the polling, and that in the more recent polls conducted in November and December, you see that, again, Biden is doing a pretty poor job across the polls, and we're going to have to give the state again to Donald Trump. Now, going to the state of Michigan as well, the next state would be the state of Minnesota. The state of Minnesota is still consistently going for Joe Biden, despite his overall pretty poor national numbers. Nevertheless, Michigan in this map goes to Joe Biden. Minnesota. Going to the state of Nevada here, we see that in the state of Nevada, Trump is also consistently leading over Joe Biden. And right now, it just doesn't look very good, at least polling-wise, for the current president, as he also loses the state of Nevada in this hypothetical map. Now, going to the next state, in the state of New Hampshire. The state of New Hampshire here, we still consistently see that Joe Biden is still defeating Trump in virtually every single poll, and therefore we do have the state of New Hampshire as a likely Democratic state. Now, both these states that Biden has won so far, Clinton won in 2016, and he has also lost the Clinton state of Nevada, which means, again, it's not looking super good for Joe Biden. Now, going to the state of Ohio here, we see that in the state of Ohio, Trump is still consistently leading over Joe Biden. Now, the three polls that he's not ahead in are both polls that does not involve him as a candidate, and therefore the state of Ohio is still in the likely Republican column. Next will be the state of North Carolina. Now, the state of North Carolina here, you see that Trump is still consistently leading over Joe Biden. Now, there was one early poll that suggested that Biden was actually ahead of Trump, but the overwhelming share of polls that suggest that Donald Trump is ahead, we're going to have to give this state to Donald Trump. Now going to our next state here, it will be the state of Pennsylvania, one of the most important states in the Electoral College. Now we see that here there's actually quite a large split. You see that Ben Shapiro, who does perform pretty well in the poll, actually gets him an 11-point lead. We see that some of the polls are pretty diverse. We see 5 polls suggesting that Trump is ahead and 4 polls suggesting that Joe Biden is ahead. However, considering that some of these polls are more recent, and we see that Biden has actually a larger lead in some of the more recent polls, I'm still going to go ahead and give this state to Joe Biden. Now, going to the next state here, which would be the state of Texas. We see that in the state of Texas here, Trump does have a lead over Joe Biden in most of the polls, but nonetheless, it's actually pretty interesting. We see that some of the recent polls suggest that Joe Biden is ahead. However, it's important to note here that all of these polls are conducted by one source, and that's generally less accurate. But even in some of the other polls that have been conducted, you do see that actually Trump's lead isn't that significant. You see that Trump is barely ahead of Joe Biden in some of those polls. Overall speaking, I'm still going to go ahead and give this state to Donald Trump, though it's actually surprisingly a pretty close state. This is one of the states that, according to polling at least, Joe Biden will overall overperform his 2020 results. Finally, we have one last state here, is the state of Wisconsin. Now, the state of Wisconsin here, we see quite a few polls actually, and most of them suggest Donald Trump will win. That is pretty consistent with the trend we've seen in some of the other polls, as well as the national average. Some of the recent polls have had it pretty close, but nonetheless, we do see some sources like the Daily Mail, which are generally more conservative, actually going ahead and giving Joe Biden a lead in the polling. Furthermore speaking, the New York Times, which had Trump winning 5 out of the 6 competitive states, but the one state that Trump ends up polling behind Joe Biden is the state of Wisconsin, though it's important to note that Joe Biden is not even crossing 40% of the vote. Regardless, the state overall speaking would still go to Donald Trump according to some of our rules here. Considering most of the polls here, we do see that Republicans have a pretty good shot at the presidency. At least this is according to the polls. Nonetheless, we're still more than 11 months away from the 2024 presidential election. Therefore, there's still a lot of time for things to change. Anyways,